I was 7 years old when my grandmother pulled me aside after my father walked out on us for good. I remember sitting on her worn velvet couch, my legs too short to touch the floor, watching her weathered hands fold together as she whispered something that would save my life more times than I could count. "Keanu," she said, her voice barely above a breath, "there's something I need to teach you. Something my grandmother taught me when I was your age, after I lost everything." I didn't understand then that I was about to receive the most powerful tool I'd ever possess. I thought she was just trying to make me feel better about Daddy leaving. But what she taught me in those next 5 minutes wasn't just words. It was a way of seeing the world that would carry me through the darkest valleys of my life. The prayer itself, I'll share it with you. But first, let me tell you why it works. Because without these stories, without understanding what it really means to surrender everything you think you know about control, those words will just be words. I was 22, living in a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls with my arms stretched out. I'd been in Hollywood for 2 years, waiting tables and sleeping on friends' couches, chasing this impossible dream of becoming an actor. Everyone back home thought I was crazy. Hell, most days I thought I was crazy too. Then came the audition for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I'd already been turned down for 17 roles that month. 17. I remember because I kept count on a piece of paper taped to my bathroom mirror, a daily reminder of my failures staring back at me every morning. The night before the audition, I sat in my car outside a 7-Eleven, engine running because I couldn't afford to turn it off and risk it not starting again. I was down to my last $40, and I had a choice: buy groceries for the week or put gas in the tank to get to the audition. That's when I remembered my grandmother's prayer. I closed my eyes, placed my hands on the steering wheel, and whispered those familiar words she'd taught me 15 years earlier. But this time, something was different. Instead of asking for the role, instead of begging the universe to give me what I wanted, I found myself saying something that surprised even me. Let me be exactly who I'm supposed to be in that room tomorrow. The next morning, I walked into that audition room, and for the first time in months, I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I wasn't trying to be what I thought they wanted. I was just me. Awkward, uncertain, but authentically me. They offered me the role on the spot. But here's what really changed my life. It wasn't getting the part that mattered. It was realizing that the prayer hadn't given me what I wanted. It had shown me who I was supposed to be. There's a difference between asking the universe to bend to your will and asking to be aligned with your truth. Fast forward 12 years. I'm sitting in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. and the doctor is telling me that Jennifer, the woman I loved more than life itself, had lost our daughter. Our baby girl, Ava, who we'd already named, already planned a future for, was gone. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. Jennifer and I, we tried to hold each other up. But grief has a way of making you feel like you're drowning even when you're standing on dry land. 18 months later, she was gone too. A car accident that took away the last piece of the life we'd built together. I remember standing in my empty house, looking at the nursery we'd prepared, and feeling something I'd never felt before. Complete and total surrender. Not the peaceful kind you read about in spiritual books. The kind that feels like dying while you're still breathing. That night, I found myself on my knees in that empty nursery. And for the first time since I was 7 years old, I couldn't remember my grandmother's prayer. The words that had carried me through every other crisis in my life were just gone. I sat there for hours, trying to remember, and all I could feel was this enormous silence. But then something happened. In that silence, I heard something else. Not words, but a kind of knowing. It was as if the prayer had evolved beyond language, beyond asking for anything at all. It had become pure acceptance of what is, rather than what I wished could be. I realized that grief isn't something you get through, it's something you carry. And the prayer my grandmother taught me wasn't about making the pain go away. It was about learning to carry it with grace. That night, I made a promise. I would honor Jennifer and Ava by living fully, not in spite of the pain, but because of what their love had taught me about the precious, fragile nature of every moment we're given. Years later, I was at the height of my career. The Matrix had become a cultural phenomenon, and everywhere I went, people saw Neo, not Keanu. It should have been everything I'd ever dreamed of, but instead, I felt more lost than ever. I was sitting in a restaurant in Tokyo, completely alone despite being surrounded by people, when a young girl approached me. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and she had this serious expression as she walked up to my table. "Excuse me," she said in perfect English, "are you happy?" Not, "Are you Keanu Reeves?" Or, "Can I have your autograph?" Just, "Are you happy?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to give her the polite answer, the celebrity answer, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I'd been so busy becoming who everyone else wanted me to be that I'd lost track of who I actually was. That little girl waited patiently while I struggled with her question, and finally I said, "I don't know. Are you?" She smiled then, this beautiful, innocent smile, and said, "Yes, because I asked you a question that made you think." After she walked away, I sat there for another 2 hours, barely touching my food, turning her question over in my mind. When was the last time I'd asked myself if I was happy? When was the last time I'd checked in with the person underneath all the roles, all the expectations, all the noise? That night, alone in my hotel room, I called my grandmother's prayer back to mind. But this time I added something new. Instead of just asking to be who I was supposed to be, I asked to remember who I had always been, beneath everything else. The answer that came wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about my career or my relationships or my achievements. It was simpler and more profound. I was someone who cared about stories, about people, about trying to leave the world a little better than I found it. That 8-year-old girl had given me back myself with a single question. This one's harder to tell, but it might be the most important. 3 years ago, I was going through what I can only describe as a crisis of purpose. Despite decades of success, despite financial security, despite having achieved everything I thought I wanted, I felt hollow. Empty, like I was sleepwalking through my own life. I'd started having these thoughts, dark thoughts, about whether any of it mattered, whether I mattered. I was driving through the canyons late one night, taking these winding roads way too fast, and part of me didn't care if I made it home. That's when my car broke down. Middle of nowhere. No cell service, just me and the darkness and these thoughts that felt too heavy to carry. I started walking, and after about a mile, I saw a light. A small house tucked back in the trees, and sitting on the porch was an elderly man, probably in his 80s, smoking a pipe and reading by lamplight. When he saw me walking up his driveway, he didn't seem surprised. He just looked up from his book and said, "Car trouble?" We got to talking, and somehow, I still don't know how, I found myself telling this complete stranger things I'd never told anyone. About the emptiness, about feeling like I was living someone else's life, about wondering if I was just taking up space in the world. He listened without judgment, without trying to fix me or give me advice. Just listened. And when I finally stopped talking, he said something that changed everything. "Son, you're not having a crisis of purpose. You're having a crisis of connection. You've gotten so good at being what other people need you to be that you've forgotten how to be what you need you to be." Then he did something unexpected. He asked me to help him fix his fence. At midnight, with flashlights and rusty tools, We spent the next 3 hours mending this broken section of his property line. And for those 3 hours, I felt more useful, more connected, more alive than I had in years. As we worked, he told me about his life, how he'd lost his wife, his children, most of his friends, how he'd learned that meaning doesn't come from what you accomplish, but from who you choose to be in each moment, especially the moments when no one's watching. When I left his house that morning, he handed me a piece of paper with something written on it. "This is what keeps me going," he said. "Maybe it'll help you too." I looked at the paper, and written in his shaky handwriting were words that echoed my grandmother's prayer, but with a twist I'd never considered. "Let me be useful. Let me be kind. Let me be present. Let me be enough." I still carry that piece of paper in my wallet, and I still think about that man, my guardian angel in work boots, whenever I feel disconnected from my purpose. Last year, I was visiting a children's hospital, doing what I thought was charitable work, bringing some joy to kids who were fighting battles I couldn't imagine. I went in feeling good about myself, feeling like I was making a difference, being the generous movie star who takes time for the less fortunate. I was in the cancer ward, talking to a 10-year-old boy named Marcus, who'd been fighting leukemia for 2 years. He was bald from chemo, stick-thin, but his eyes were so bright, so full of life, that it took my breath away. We were talking about movies, about his dreams of becoming a filmmaker someday, when he suddenly got very quiet and asked me, "Mr. Reeves, are you lonely?" The question caught me completely off guard. Here was this kid facing the fight of his life, and he was worried about me being lonely. I started to give him the standard answer, No, I'm fine." But something in his eyes stopped me. "Yeah," I heard myself saying. "Sometimes I am." He nodded, like this made perfect sense. "Me too," he said. "But you know what I figured out? Being lonely isn't the same as being alone. Lonely is when you forget that you matter to people. Alone is just geography." This 10-year-old kid, this warrior in a hospital gown, had just taught me something about loneliness that I'd been struggling with my whole adult life. I realized in that moment that I hadn't come there to help him. He had been placed in my path to help me. Before I left that day, Marcus asked me if I wanted to pray with him. Not my grandmother's prayer, but his own version, which he'd made up during his treatment. We held hands, this sick little boy and this grown man, and he whispered, "Thank you for letting me be here today. Thank you for letting me matter. Thank you for letting me love and be loved. Help me remember that even when things are hard, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I cried in my car for 20 minutes after leaving that hospital. Because Marcus had shown me that my grandmother's prayer wasn't just about finding my purpose or accepting what is. It was about recognizing that my very existence, struggles and all, was a gift to someone else. 6 months later, Marcus passed away. But at his funeral, his mother told me that he'd talked about our conversation constantly, how meeting me had reminded him that his dreams mattered even if he might not live to see them come true. She said he'd been writing screenplays on his iPad until the very end. I realized that day that we're all dying, all fighting our own battles, and the only thing that really matters is how we choose to love each other through it. Looking back on these experiences, I can see 5 clear lessons that my grandmother's prayer taught me, though it took decades to understand them fully. Lesson 1. Authenticity is not about being perfect, it's about being real. That audition for Bill and Ted taught me that people don't connect with your masks, they connect with your truth. The moment I stopped trying to be what I thought they wanted and started being who I actually was, everything changed. Lesson 2. Grief is not a problem to be solved, it's love with nowhere to go. Losing Jennifer and Ava nearly destroyed me, but it also taught me that the depth of our pain reflects the depth of our capacity to love. The prayer didn't take away my grief, it taught me to honor it. Lesson 3. Success without self-awareness is just sophisticated failure. That little girl in Tokyo showed me that all the achievement in the world means nothing if you've lost touch with your own joy. The prayer isn't about getting what you want, it's about wanting what you have. Lesson 4. Purpose is not what you do, it's who you choose to be. The old man fixing his fence at midnight taught me that meaning comes not from grand gestures, but from small acts of service, from choosing to be useful and kind when no one's watching. Lesson 5. We're all connected in ways we can't see. Marcus showed me that our struggles aren't just personal, they're part of a larger tapestry where everyone's thread matters. The prayer helps us remember that our pain has purpose and our joy is meant to be shared. After living through all these experiences, I began to see a pattern that had been invisible to me for most of my life. Every moment of real transformation, every breakthrough, every instance of genuine connection came not when I was trying to control outcomes, but when I was willing to be fully present with whatever was actually happening. But it was deeper than that. Looking back, I could see that each crisis had been preparing me for the next one. The abandonment by my father taught me early that I couldn't rely on others to define my worth, a lesson that would save me when fame tried to tell me who I was supposed to be. The struggle of those early acting years taught me the difference between wanting something and being ready for it. Wisdom I desperately needed when success finally came. The devastating loss of Jennifer and Ava broke me open in ways that nothing else could have. But it also gave me a capacity for empathy that I'd never possessed before. When I met that old man fixing his fence in the middle of the night, I could recognize the depth of his grief because I'd been there. When Marcus asked me if I was lonely, I could answer honestly because I'd learned that hiding from pain only makes it grow stronger in the shadows. I started to understand that the prayer my grandmother taught me wasn't magic words that changed external circumstances. It was a practice of internal surrender that changed me. Each time I used it, I wasn't asking the universe to give me what I wanted. I was asking to become the person who could handle whatever came next. The pattern became crystal clear. We don't pray to change what happens to us. We pray to change how we happen to what happens to us. I realized that most of our suffering comes from fighting reality instead of working with it. We exhaust ourselves trying to push the river instead of learning how to navigate the current. The prayer was my grandmother's way of teaching me to stop fighting the water and start learning how to swim. Every story I've shared with you has the same underlying structure. I faced something that challenged my sense of control. I surrendered to what was actually happening instead of what I wished was happening. And in that surrender, I found something more valuable than what I thought I wanted. I found who I was supposed to become. The pattern revealed something profound. We don't grow from getting what we want. We grow from becoming the person who can handle what we get. And sometimes, what breaks us is exactly what we need to break us open to a larger version of ourselves. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty rather than something to hide. That's what these experiences taught me about being human. Our breaks, our failures, our losses, they're not flaws to be concealed. They're the places where the light gets in, where wisdom enters, where we become useful to others who are walking similar paths. Here's what I've learned after 5 decades of trying to figure out this thing called life. Every single person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Every single person you encounter is looking for the same things you are, to matter, to be seen, to be loved, to make sense of their own story. My grandmother's prayer works not because it's magic, but because it connects us to something larger than our individual struggles. When we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations and start asking how we can conform to life's invitations, everything changes. The secret isn't in the specific words, it's in the posture of the heart behind them. It's about moving from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "How can I grow from this?" It's about shifting from, "What do I want?" to, Who am I meant to become? This isn't just spiritual platitude. This is practical wisdom that has been tested in the fires of real loss, real fear, real confusion. It's what carried me through my father's abandonment, through the loss of the people I loved most, through the disorientation of fame, through the darkness of depression, through the ongoing challenge of trying to live with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. The universal truth hidden in all these personal experiences is this: we are all more resilient than we know, more connected than we feel, and more loved than we believe. But we only discover this when we stop running from difficulty and start learning from it. So what was the prayer? What were those words my grandmother whispered to me when I was 7 years old, sitting on that velvet couch with my legs too short to touch the floor? It's simpler than you might expect. Let me see clearly. Let me love fully. Let me serve humbly. Let me trust completely. That's it. 4 lines, 16 words, a lifetime of wisdom distilled into a single breath. But here's what I've learned. The power isn't in reciting these words perfectly. The power is in living them imperfectly. It's in the attempt, the practice, the daily choice to see past your own fear and pain to the deeper truth of who you are and why you're here. Let me break this down for you, because each line contains multitudes. Let me see clearly. This isn't about having perfect vision or always knowing what to do. It's about seeing past the stories we tell ourselves, past the roles we think we need to play, past the fear that keeps us small. It's about seeing the person in the mirror without the masks we wear for others. It's about seeing opportunities in obstacles, growth in failure, connection in conflict. Most importantly, it's about seeing that the present moment, exactly as it is, not as we wish it were, contains everything we need. Let me love fully. This was the hardest lesson for me to learn. After losing so much, I thought loving fully meant setting myself up for more pain. But loving fully isn't about loving perfectly or only loving safe people. It's about loving with your whole heart, knowing that heartbreak is the price of having a heart that works. It's about loving the difficult people, the impossible situations, even the parts of yourself you'd rather hide. It's about understanding that love isn't a finite resource that gets depleted. It's a muscle that gets stronger with use. Let me serve humbly. This isn't about grand gestures or charity work that gets you recognition. This is about remembering that service is how we remember our own value. When I helped that old man fix his fence at midnight, when I listened to Marcus share his stories, when I answered that little girl's question honestly, these weren't acts of kindness I performed for others. They were gifts I gave myself, reminders that I had something to offer, that my presence mattered. Humble service is the antidote to ego, the cure for feeling useless, the pathway back to purpose. Let me trust completely. This is the hardest one, the one that took me decades to understand. Trusting completely doesn't mean being naive or passive. It means trusting that there's a larger story being written, that your pain has purpose, that your struggles are preparing you for something you can't see yet. It means trusting that you're exactly where you need to be, even when, especially when, you can't understand why. It's about releasing the illusion of control and embracing the reality of participation. These 16 words have carried me through everything: abandonment, failure, loss, confusion, success, and the ongoing challenge of trying to be a decent human being in a complicated world. They've been my compass when I was lost, my anchor when I was adrift, my reminder that there's always a way forward, even when I can't see the path. I'm sharing all of this not because my story is special, but because it's not. It's human. It's the story of someone who has struggled and failed and gotten back up, who has loved and lost and learned to love again, who has questioned everything and found peace in the questioning itself. But here's what I want you to understand, and this took me decades to learn. Your story doesn't have to be extraordinary to be meaningful. You don't need to lose as much as I've lost or achieve what I've achieved for your life to matter profoundly to someone else. Marcus taught me that. That 10-year-old boy with his iPad full of stories showed me that significance isn't measured in box office numbers or awards or headlines. Your story matters just as much as mine. Your struggles are just as valid. Your dreams are just as important. Your pain has just as much purpose. And your capacity for growth, for love, for making a difference in this world is just as infinite as anyone else's. I think about the people who shaped me. My grandmother with her prayer, that little girl in Tokyo with her question, the old man with his fence, Marcus with his stories. And I realized that most of them had no idea the impact they were having. They weren't trying to change my life. They were just being authentically themselves, sharing what they had to offer, trusting that their small acts of truth and kindness mattered. You're doing that right now, whether you know it or not. Someone in your life needs exactly what you have to offer. Someone needs to hear your story, learn from your struggles, be inspired by your resilience. Someone needs to see how you handle difficulty with grace, how you love imperfectly but genuinely, how you keep showing up even when you're scared. The prayer my grandmother taught me when I was 7 wasn't really about the words. It was about remembering that we don't have to carry everything alone, that there's wisdom available to us if we're willing to listen, that every ending is also a beginning, and every failure is also a teacher, and every moment of darkness is also an invitation to find the light that was always there inside us. You don't need my grandmother's specific words. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. You need your own version of surrender, your own practice of presence, your own way of remembering that you are here for a reason, that your life has meaning, that your story is still being written. And here's the beautiful truth I've discovered. The moment you start living like your story matters, really matters, other people start to believe their stories matter too. It's contagious, this remembering of our own significance. It spreads from person to person like light, passing between candles. So whatever you're facing today, whether it's loss or confusion, fear or loneliness, dreams deferred or paths unclear, remember this: you are stronger than you know, you are loved more than you feel, and you're exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to be. The prayer that changes everything isn't something you say once and forget. It's something you live every day, one imperfect, beautiful, courageously human moment at a time. Your story is still being written, and it's going to be magnificent.